Hey there, welcome into this Adobe Illustrator tutorial brought to you as always by tutvid.com. If you're new around here, my name is Nathaniel Dodson, and today we're going to take a look at creating this very cool deer standing in the middle of a road silhouette artwork effect. I saw it on Instagram. I don't remember the artist's name off the top of my head. However, I will absolutely find their information. There will be a link down in the bio. Click on the link, follow on Instagram, show them some love. Really cool stuff, and I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial as I sort of follow along and try to recreate the artwork as best I'm able using a bunch of different techniques in Illustrator that will hopefully help you take your Illustrator game to the next level as well. So I hope you enjoyed. If you do, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and without further ado, let's jump into this thing and get it started. Okay, and here we are in Adobe Illustrator. First thing we would do is begin by creating a new document. I'm going with a document that's size 2560 by 1440. I'm also working in the RGB color mode here, and we would create that. I already have my document created. So what I'm going to do is grab my rectangle tool here. It's located near my ellipse tool. I'm going to get rid of the stroke by just hitting a little slash icon there. I'm going to double click on my fill, and I'm going to fill this with the color 10002E. I'm going to hit OK. It's a very, very dark bluish purple color. I'm going to click a single time. I'm going to say, hey, give me a 2560 by 1440 rectangle. It's the size of my document. And then here in my align panel, I'm going to say, hey, align to artboard, and then align vertical and horizontal centers just like that. I'm going to lock up my background layer. In fact, I can double click and just name that layer BG. Create a new layer, and we're going to keep our artwork up here on this layer. So maybe I'll call this layer artwork. And what we'll do is place another rectangle. Now, I don't want this to be the same color as the background. This can be any color, so I'm just going to make it green. I'm going to click a single time. I'm going to go with a 600 by 50 pixel rectangle. There we have it. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit here, because now what we want to do is go ahead and grab the direct selection tool and select one of the top anchor points. So I'm going to go top left. I'm going to hold down my shift key and tap the right arrow key 24 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like so. And then I'm going to grab the top right anchor point, and I'm going to nudge this to the left 24 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. I had to subtract 4 because I almost went to 30. So 24, so we're moving it inward quite a bit to create this sort of flattened triangle shape. I'm going to duplicate this shape by going Edit Copy, and then Edit Paste in Front. Up here in my Properties panel, I have my Transform options. I'm going to set my reference point to the top center, just like that, okay? And then I'm going to set the width here to 1,000 pixels, not 100. We want to go 1,000. We're off to a great start here. And then for the height, I'm going to set this to maybe like 200. You can see it pushes the triangle out just like this. Now, I want to be able to see this triangle against the sort of triangular shape we created before. So let's just give this literally any other color. That's fine. And now we're going to go View, and make sure you turn your snap to point on, because what we're going to do is, again, grab the direct selection tool and select one of the top anchor points here and just drag it inward. I'm holding down Shift, and you're going to feel it snap. And what that's snapping to is the exact anchor point in the green shape underneath it. Let's do it with the shape with the anchor point on the other side, and there we have it. So if I just drag this away for a second, you can see this anchor point would now be exactly lined up with the anchor point right there. That's going to be important because this bottom triangle is sort of going to be the beam of light that's splayed out across this pink shape, which is going to end up being the base of our road. Next, let's create the shape that's going to make up the lines in our road. We're going to add some color to this in a minute. The lines, I'll just make these a blue. So I'm going to say width of about 15 and a height of 185. There we have it. And before I create the second line, let's make some changes to this one shape. I'm going to take my direct selection tool and again, click on the top left anchor point and just nudge it to the left once. Then I'm going to select the top right anchor point, and I'm going to nudge this to the left about 8 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can see it's almost creating this sort of perspective-y shape for us. I'm going to deselect and reselect it with my black arrow selection tool, and then I'm going to go Object Transform and choose to shear it. Here in the Shear dialog box, I'm just shearing it along the horizontal axis, -1 degree, and I'm going to hit OK. Then what I'll do is duplicate this. So Edit Copy, and then Edit Paste in Front. And really, all I need to do is hit the Flip Horizontal button here in my Transform panel and drag it over. I'm holding down Shift just to sort of keep it in line. And then you can nudge this kind of closer together or however you think it needs to be to create some road lines for you. And then I want to drag this to the center of my road. Now, I don't quite know where that is, so here's what we'll do. We'll group these two rectangles, Command or Control G, and I'm going to undo that. I don't want to move the bottom road. I'm going to select those lines and the big pink shape. So I'm just Shift selecting both of them. And then letting go of Shift, I'm going to click on the pink pink road an additional time. See how it gives me like that thick outline? What that means is we're now aligning to that object. So align to key object. We've made that pink shape the key object, and I'm going to say, hey, look, align to the horizontal there, and then what I can do is just move the line downward a little bit, just kind of to where I think it needs to be. Something like that will work. We're going to end up masking off this top edge and the bottom edge of the lines as well. Let's go ahead and select the stripes for the road, and we're going to fill this with a color. I'm going to use the hex input here in my color panel. I'm going to fill this with F9, FF, B8. This is going to be like a super buttery yellow color. And I'm also going to mask away the front part of my road stripes, so they just sort of fade away. So here in the transparency panel, I'm going to double click my mask. There we go. I'm going to say, look, don't clip it. Let's unclip that. And then I'm going to create a rectangle that kind of encompasses the entire thing, just like that. And I'm going to fill this with a black to white gradient. So over here in the gradient panel, I'm just going to click on the black to white gradient thumbnail, and it looks all funky. Don't worry about that. Let's go ahead and set this angle, maybe like 90 degrees. Now you can see it's sort of trying to fade out the back end. So let's hit this little reverse gradient button right there. There we go. Now the reason it's not totally fading out here is because this actually isn't solid black. It's just a very, very dark gray. So click on that black color stop and come down, and from the little pop-out menu here, choose RGB, and you can see now we're getting a true black. So I'm going to drag this black up this way, maybe this way a little bit more, and then I'll push the white out, tell the white to expand closer to the black color stop, and we just get a nice amount of our lines being there, but still a very sharp fade off here at the end. Make sure that you select your artwork thumbnail in the transparency panel to get out of the mask editing mode, and we have edited and placed and created, I should say, our road lines. Okay, let's hide the big pink path for a quick second and add a gradient to our green shape. So we're just going to add a black to white gradient. You can see we've got the gradient that we just used. I'm going to kind of reset this a little bit, so I'm going to set my center point here to about 50% location. The black color stop here on the left, I'm going to make it white by just hitting the white color swatch there. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity to 0%. I'll set the location of this to like 30%. I think that'll work for this. And then over here, white at 100% opacity, 100% location is perfect. And then we just set the angle here to 90 degrees. So there we have it. That's our first gradient. Now we can turn the pink path on. And as I look at this, we should probably select our sort of rear path and reduce the opacity of it. Let's drop it down to like 25% opacity. Maybe we'll even go ahead and set it to the overlay blend mode, or maybe, here's what we'll do. We'll go normal, and then we're going to duplicate this. Let me shut off the pink path once more so we can see what we're doing. Edit, copy, edit, paste in front. And I'm going to set this back to 100% opacity and set this to the overlay blend mode. So it's going to give us kind of this more contrasty, bluish, purpley fall off. Now we can turn on our path on top of this. And I want to add a colored gradient. So this is going to be a pink gradient. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to just select my little drop-down menu here and say, give me the normal black to white gradient first, just so I get two default standard full opacity sliders. Select the white slider first, and I'm going to punch in a hex code here in the hex input in the color panel. I'm going to say 8C33E8. And this is going to be the color we use on the other side as well. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity to 30%, and I'm going to leave it all the way over here on the left side of my gradient strip. Over here on the right side of the gradient, I'm once again going to punch in 8C33E8. And I'm going to change the opacity here to 0%. And I'm going to set the location to like 85. So I'm just pushing it down a little bit. Now I do want to set the overall angle of this gradient to 90 degrees. And you can see it's giving us a strong purple in the foreground. So I just want to make sure I reverse the gradient. I built it sort of backward there. And you can see here we have the basic base of our road. It's a very purpley, bluish looking road, but that's just the way I like it. Let's select the lines for the road, which now don't look to be in place at all. And here in the transparency panel, we'll just set these to the soft light blend mode. And now we're starting to build out the road for our car and silhouette artwork, looking pretty good. I'm going to select all of these elements. In fact, I can just drag a selection over all of them and go Object Group to group them up. All right, so let's begin building the car, or what we're going to see of the car, and that's going to begin with the grille. We're essentially going to make a grille and two headlights, and the brightness of the headlights is going to sell the fact that there's supposed to be a car behind this artwork we've created. So we're going to grab the rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to click a single time, and I am going to go with a 42 by 12 pixel rounded rectangle with 3 pixel corners. Hit OK. It's going to just drop this in there. I'm going to move it to about the middle of my road, just like that. We can make it perfect in a minute. But most importantly here, I'm going to come up here on my properties panel. Under transform, I've got my triple dot, and under here I have my rounded corner options. I'm going to make sure I'm not linking them all together, because the two bottom corners, I want to bump them up to a 9 pixel rounded corner. The two top corners can remain at a 3. So you can see the shape that we now have. Very cool. All right, I'm going to nudge this down a little bit, and I'm going to fill this shape with a black to white gradient. So I'll go with that original black to white. I'm going to select my black color stop, make sure it's a solid rich black. I'm going to drag it to the middle, about 50% on the location area. I'm going to click to add another black color stop, and I'm going to fill this with white. So we essentially have our white to white gradient. You're going to see exactly how this will work in a minute. We can use the sliders to just push the white back a little bit and expand the black through the center there. And all we need to do is set this shape to the blend mode of screen. It's going to drop away the black, and then reduce the opacity to something like 60%. So there's part of our grill. Maybe I'll add actually some grill lines in here, and I'll do that just using a quick rectangle. So I'm going to drag out just a thin little rectangle there and fill this with a solid black. Something like that will work. I'm going to drag this shape over to, let's say, here, and then I'm just going to hold down Alt and the Shift key, that's Option and the Shift key on the Mac, and drag out a bunch of copies of this all the way across the face of the grill, just like this. And then I want to go ahead and select them all. Now, it's a little difficult to select them, so I'm going to drag a selection over all of this stuff. Of course, it's selecting that rounded rectangle as well, so hold down Shift and just click on that rectangle to deselect it. Now that we have these objects selected, in our Align portion of the Properties panel, we want to make sure that we're aligning to the selection and not the artboard. So Align to Selection and distribute the horizontal centers. There we go, just like so. And what I'll do is group this up. Object, well, I want to make sure I'm out of my Align panel. Object Group to group them together. I'll set this to the blend mode of like soft light. I'm going to reduce the opacity way down. This is to be super subtle, so an opacity of about 25% is going to work great. And I'm going to mask this as well. So double click to add a quick layer mask, unclip that, and what I'll do is drag a quick rectangle over this, and let's fill it with that same black to white gradient, just like that. But in this case, I want my outer edges to be black, so I'm going to I'm just going to drag that white one to the center, and then over here select this white slider, fill it with the color black, or set it to a solid black, just like so, and set the angle to 90 degrees. And then it's just a matter of pulling these color stops in until the very top of the grill is gone, and expand the white out to really give some volume to the middle part of our grill. So something like that. It really does not have to be exact at all, as long as it just sort of looks like they're fading away a little bit. That's kind of the effect I'm going for. And then I'm going to make sure I get out of my mask editing mode by clicking on my artwork thumbnail in the transparency panel. And you can select your grill and nudge it around. Make sure it's centered up within the sort of grill frame as best as you're able. And there's the grill of our car. So here comes the fun thing. I'm going to lock up my road group just so we don't select it and do any damage to it. I'll probably also just lock up both of my grill layers there. You could actually select and group them. We'll maybe do that later. We want to create the headlights. So we're going to start by creating one headlight. Once we get one good headlight, we can duplicate it over to the other side. So grab the ellipse tool and click a single time. We're going to create a 16 by 13 pixel ellipse. There we have it. I'm going to move this over. I'm going to fill this not with black, but with white. Then we're going to come up here to Effect and choose Blur and Gaussian Blur. And I'm going to go with a 5 pixel Gaussian Blur. Hit OK. And then we'll set the blend mode here to Color Dodge. So you can see that changes that quite a bit. There is the first piece of our headlight. We're going to duplicate this. Edit. Copy. And we want to go edit paste in back. We're going to sort of build the headlight backward a little bit. So we have our top shape here, and it's hard to see because it's technically just a white ellipse. It looks pink because of that color dodge blend mode, but it is still just filled with white. I'm going to enlarge this shape until it's about 20 pixels wide. So you can see, there you go, about 22 pixels wide. That's perfect. And I'm going to change the blur. So here in the Appearance panel, we can actually change the Gaussian blur that's been attached to this ellipse. We're working on the lower ellipse here. So I'm going to go to this Gaussian blur and say, hey, look, I actually want you to be a 20 pixel Gaussian blur. Hit OK. You can see it's blurring it much more. And I want to change this to more of a blue color. 29A1FF is the hex code. Hit OK. And you can see we've got this crazy blue glow happening around that pink center we created. Now we want to duplicate this shape. So we're going to go Edit, Copy, Edit, paste this in back. Again, we're sort of building backward. And I want to increase the size of this. By the way, when I scale, I'm holding down Shift and Option. That's Shift and Alt on the PC. I want to increase this until it's about 65 pixels around. So right about there. It looks huge. It looks unseemly. It just looks bad at this point, frankly. Let's change the fill. I want this to be more of a pink. So here I'm going to go FF91FF. I'll hit OK here, and to really help control this, back in the transparency panel, I'm going to change the blend mode from color dodge to overlay. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but sometimes when you're applying a big blur to objects in Illustrator, it sort of starts to look like the blur gets cut off. We can fix that by up here under Effect in Document Raster Effect Settings. We're going to go in there and just say, hey, look, add, maybe we'll move this out to like 100 pixels around an object and hit OK. That'll just ensure we have nice smooth edges for all of our blurred shapes and things here. Okay, let's select the blue shape this time right here, the blue ellipse that we created, the blurred blue ellipse. We're going to duplicate that, edit copy, and choose Edit Paste This in back. Now this is only going to paste it right behind the blue shape, so we want to manually drag it down beneath the pink ellipse. And you can see Illustrator does not always update the Layers panel. It seems to be just a glitchy thing in Illustrator right now. If this happens to you, you can just double-click on your Layers panel to close it, double-click to open it, and it should refresh everything, and you should be good to go. I'm going to change the fill here of this from the blue to just a solid white, and we're going to change the blend mode to normal. Let's grab the pink shape. We're going to duplicate this one, the blurred pink shape, edit to copy, and edit paste in back. Again, I'm going to drag this down beneath. And with this pink ellipse, I'm going to scale it down until it's about 25, 26 pixels in size, somewhere right around there. And I'm just going to leave this as that overlay blend mode just to add a little bit more of that pink and blue glow to the outer edge of what's going to be my car headlight. Now, at this point, we've created, let me just close and reopen my Layers panel. We've created the base of the glow of the headlight, sort of the middle punch, the thrust of the headlight. We need to create the flare to really add sort of the atmosphericness of the headlight to this and help sell it a little bit more. So I'm going to select the very top ellipse, just that simple white blurred ellipse, and we're going to copy that, edit copy. And we are going to paste this in back, but what I want to do is make sure I paste it in back and then drag it all the way down below all of these shapes. So now it's sitting underneath the rest of my car headlight shapes. In fact, what we're going to do to this will probably be best suited if we shut off all the rest of the shapes. Now here with this ellipse, we want to get rid of the blur. And the way the blur works, that makes it easy. We can just go to our Appearance panel, select that Gaussian blur, and drag it right to the trash. Now we are going to be applying a Gaussian blur to this later, but just to keep things simple so you can understand exactly what we're doing, I want to get rid of it so we can visually 100% see what I'm about to do. I am now going to come over here and I'm going to choose the Crystallize tool. I'm going to double click on the Crystallize tool and you can see you can edit all sorts of things about the Crystallize tool. I'm going to say, look, let's make this maybe like 85 pixels wide and 65 tall. I'll leave the intensity at 10, and the main things we want to be concerned with are complexity and detail. 1 and 3 will probably work for us, but let's see what they look like, and we'll adjust if need be. Now, if I click on this, I start to get sort of this big star-bursting effect. The mistake that a lot of people make is clicking too many times. It's better to click once and maybe a second time and then kind of, all right, there's our initial shape. It looks a little crazy, maybe a little comic booky. If that's the case, we can even come in and choose the scallop tool and that'll sort of pull the center back a little bit. Something like that. I think we'll live with that shape for the time being. I'm now going to scale this shape up until it's about, I don't know, 100 to 130 pixels in width. So right there, 126. This is probably good for the width. You can see it looks ridiculous. It looks kind of crazy. We're going to go Effect. We're going to apply a Gaussian blur. Not the Apply Gaussian blur, but Gaussian blur to open the Gaussian blur dialog box. And I'm going to give this like a 5-pixel blur. Hit OK. I want this to, in the transparency panel, be something that is the overlay blend mode. And we're just going to set the opacity to about 45%. So you can see we're really knocking it down because we're going to be building this effect out just step by step here. So I'm going to go edit and choose paste in front here to paste another copy of that ellipse right on top of that starburst that we just created. We'll drag that down. I actually looked at the wrong layer there. There we go. Our shape is now right on top of where we want it to be. I'm going to lock up the layer that we just created. So this, just to name it, this is our first flare, sort of flare 1. And this here is going to become flare 2. Now with this layer, we'll go through the same stuff. Go to Appearance, get rid of that Gaussian blur. We are going to be setting this to overlay, but for the time being, I'm going to leave it as color dodge so we can see what we're doing here. I'm going to grab the Crystallize tool again, and this time with the Crystallize tool, I'm going to click sort of in the bottom left sort of quadrant, if you will, of this ellipse, and just drag to the top left, just one stroke like that, clicking and pressing through it to really create this much more, I don't know, bursting looking flare shape. I'll go ahead and set this to overlay. We're going to blur this as well, Effect Gaussian blur. And I'll give this something like a 5, maybe a 6-pixel blur. And there are our first 2 flares. We'll go Edit Paste in front again. And there we have our new ellipse. I'll just double click and name this one Flare 3. Make sure I lock up my Flare 2 layer. And once more, in the appearance panel, we'll just get rid of that Gaussian blur. Go back to the transparency panel. And here I'm going to do kind of the same thing. Maybe I'll press once, maybe twice, something like that, just to get a little scraggled action going on. Maybe use the scallop tool here and draw the center back inward a little bit. That might be a little bit too much detail. So let's just reduce detail maybe down to 1. Let's see what that looks like. Something like that might be better for us. Now this one we're going to leave set to color dodge. We are going to reduce the opacity to about 35% on it. Of course, we're going to apply just a little Gaussian blur. Something like 5 pixels should be good. And let me deselect and see what this looks like. So this is sort of the base of the flare of the headlight. It kind of looks a little funky. So let me just collapse properties for a second here. And we have all of these layers stacked on top of this. So let's turn Flare 2, Flare 3, and then all of the layers on top of it on that are ultimately going to be making up our headlight. And you can see what we get, this really kind of cool effect. And if you zoom out far enough, well, if you zoom out far enough, kind of anything looks good. But if you zoom out far enough here, it does sort of look like a car headlight. So let's go ahead and select all of these shapes that we created, and we'll group them up. Object Group. And there we go. We have one headlight. I'm going to nudge it upward just a little bit. I don't really want to push it out away from the grill too much. If you do that, it starts to tend to not look much like a car. Now I'm going to duplicate this over by holding down the Alt or Option key and click and drag a copy over. Also hold down Shift and you'll just constrain a nice straight line across. And then I'm going to nudge this back over toward the grill a little bit. I'm going to nudge this toward the grill, and something like that should be about what we're looking for. If I zoom out, you can see we don't really even need to create the body of the car. It just sort of looks like a car. Now the grill is a little bit too hot, so what I'm going to do is select both of these headlight groups, and I'm going to drag them beneath the grill. And you can see now the grill is looking a little bit more just kind of relaxed there, just chilling out in between the two headlights. I kind of like what I'm seeing. I do want to create just a little bit of overall light around what would be the car as well. So let's just grab the ellipse tool, click a single time, and we're going to set it to a 240 by like 160 size ellipse. That looks like it's probably about right. I'm going to fill this with a color here, so select my fill here, and I'm going to go with a DA91FF, so it's just kind of this light pink color that we've been using. I'll blur this quite a bit. Let's go Effect Gaussian Blur, and let's knock this out with like a 55 pixel blur. You can see quite light, and I'm going to set this to something like soft light, and maybe an opacity of about 40%. So it's just going to be a subtle effect. And let's drag this down. And I kind of want to drag this down so most of the light, I think most of the light should sort of be above the car. Something kind of like that I think will look cool for the car. Yeah, I think that's kind of neat. Okay, now the next thing to do is to create the reflection of the headlights on the road. And we're going to do that, again, using the gradient tool, but in a little bit of a creative way. So grab your ellipse tool, and we're going to click a single time and create an ellipse of 140 by 180. Kind of more of an oval than an ellipse. I just know that that shape works, or that size, excuse me, works for this document. And I'm going to fill this with a black to white gradient. So hit the black to white gradient swatch in the gradient panel, and I'm going to create a custom gradient. So this is going to have two white handles over here on the left side going to a solid black handle on the right side. Let's select the black handle. From the flyout menu, go RGB, and just make sure it's real, true, deep black. But here, we're going to make sure that the white slider, we should be there, a 100% opacity, location of 0%. And then here, we're going to have our white slider at about a 33% location. That should work for us. And then over here, I'm going to drag the black in until it's about at 66-ish%. Now next, this is an important step. We want to set this to a radial gradient. And then I want to actually use the gradient tool because it's going to allow me to kind of cut the gradient off against the top of the shape. So I'm going to click right about here, and I'm going to drag out the gradient, something like that. It's a little bit too much maybe. Maybe something more like that would work for us. Maybe I should pull it over this way a little more. Something sort of like that might work. Maybe I'll pull a little beyond there. Yeah, I think something like that could be neat for the reflection, the reflection for the headlight. It doesn't quite look like a headlight reflection yet, because what we now need to do is set this to the blend mode of screen, which is going to drop away the black bits. Let's reduce the opacity just a little bit, just to take some of the sting off of it, allow that dark road to soak up a little bit of the light. I went with a 95% opacity, and we're going to give this kind of a heavy blur. So Effect Gaussian Blur, and we're going to blur this like 45 pixels. Hit OK, and you can see the effect that we've got happening right there. Now I'm going to drag this down, and I'm just going to rotate it kind of until it looks right. And whatever right is, you'll kind of know it when you see it. I'll adjust the shape a little bit. I'll maybe tip it over some more. I'll extend it out a little more. I'll pull it over a little bit more. I think something like this, yeah, something like that will kind of work for us. Once I've got the shape in position where I like it, I'm going to duplicate it, edit copy, and then choose edit, paste in front. And then what I'll do is open up my properties panel, and I'll just flip it along the horizontal axis. Or I'm sorry, I'll flip it horizontally, but that's flipping along the vertical axis. And I'm going to drag it straight over and move it into place, just kind of like that. Maybe what I'll do is nudge it together. It's got to be a little bit closer together. So it's got to be sort of almost overlapping the yellow lines a little bit. And you can always come into here and tweak the gradient a little bit as well if you think, you know what, there's just too much white. It's too strong. It's just coming off not quite the way I want it to be. Or if you feel like it should be expanded outward a little bit, the width-wise, you can do that. You can do anything you want here and just really tweak and adjust your headlight reflections to get them exactly how you want them to be. In fact, I'll select shapes one at a time here, and I'm just going to push the amount of white back a bit just to really rein that in a little. There we go, something kind of like that. And they don't have to be exactly the same even. You can see over here I'm making this reflection bigger and the one here on the right a little bit smaller, and that's completely fine. Okay, now the next step is going to be find a stock photo of an animal or a mythical creature or a superhero or some distinctive object that you want to place in the road that's sort of staring down this car. I'm going to paste in a trace that I made of a deer, elk, horned creatures in general, stuff that's really distinctive based on its silhouette all work really well. And all I did here was, number one, you can take the pen tool and trace something out and just give it a solid fill. What I did was I used the brush tool and the paintbrush tool, and I very quickly traced around this, just one body part at a time. Then I, filled all of my shapes, and then I used the Pathfinder to merge them all together into one big shape. And I just colored it this super bright green color because, I want you to be able to see it. Then what I'll do is I'm going to move the deer into place, so he's definitely popping up here in the middle of the road, blocking the car a little bit. And I'm going to change the fill to the same thing as my background, which if I recall correctly, I'll go into my color picker here, is the color 10002E, which should be that super dark purpley blue color. And the main thing I'm concerned with is just the bottom of the animal. We want to make sure it blends perfectly off into the background so you can't see where it begins or where it ends. So now this is really cool. It looks really cool as it is. We're going to do something that makes it even cooler, and that is adding some mountains and a night sky behind this to really complete the scene and build out some additional depth. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to set my fill color to just a bright green so we can see what's happening. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool. I'm going to click a single time and say, hey, create a 900 by 100 pixel rectangle. There we have it. And I'm going to now immediately change the fill because I just want to get the right fill into it. So I'm going to go a 150240. It should be a very dark blue, not quite as dark as the background, but heading in that direction. I'm going to move this up a little bit, and I'm going to go Effect, Distort and Transform, and choose to roughen this. Now all I'm going to do here is say roughen it 1 pixel in size and 1 detail per inch. Points are going to be corners, not smooth, and I'm going to hit OK. It's a very, very subtle effect. In fact, if I set it back to green, you can kind of see what's going on. I'm going to undo that to bring it back to blue. And I want to duplicate this shape. So I'm going to go Edit Copy, and I want to paste it behind. So we're going to go Paste in Back. I'm going to nudge it up a couple clicks. I'm going to change the fill color. Double-click on the fill. I'm going to change the fill color here to 291052. You can see it's just a very slightly lighter bluish purpley color, something kind of like that. We're going to go, not effect, I'm sorry, we're going to go to the appearance panel, and we're going to select roughen here because these are all live effects here in Illustrator. So we can click roughen to change some of the settings here in roughen. And I'm just going to change the size from 1 pixel, or I'm sorry, from 1% to 2%, hit OK. And you can see that makes a bit of a difference. Now we have what looks like a totally different mountain range. I'm going to maybe even expand this outward a little bit, just like that. All right, we select the rearmost shape, and we're going to duplicate this. Edit, copy. And again, paste it behind. Edit, paste, and back. We're going to nudge this upward a little bit using our arrow keys, just like that. You can't really see any difference. We'll change the fill, double-click. And the fill I want here is 3D1F7A. So again, another purpley blue color, but even a little bit lighter. Once more, we're going to edit the roughen for this by clicking on roughen in the appearance panel. And here, I'm going to set the size back to 1%, and I'm going to change the detail to 2 per inch, and I'll hit OK. Now what we can do, select all 3 of these shapes and go Object, Expand Appearance, and now they're just the simple paths. We can't go and edit the roughen for any of these anymore because Illustrator just sees them as paths, just as though we drew them with the pen tool or something like that. And also with none of these selected, I can go over the edge with the wrinkle tool here. Maybe I want to make the brush a little bit bigger, double-click. I'll make the intensity go up to about 25%, and let's say 200 wide by 100 tall. Detail of 7, let's push it back to like 5. Complexity 3 is totally fine. We'll hit OK. And we're just going to begin squiggling over the top of our mountains just to add very fine detail in there, as though it's sort of like forest and trees on those hills that we just drew. Very quickly, we can add very raw, organic-looking detail to those edges that way. Then I'll select all 3 of these shapes, and I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key, and I'm going to compress them together a little bit. So I'm really going to squish them down. I'm just holding down Alt and Option when I do that, so it compresses it from the top and the bottom. And then I can make a couple subtle adjustments, maybe open it up just a little bit, maybe nudge it over to one side or other. And there we go. We have those shapes. I'm going to select all 3. We're going to go Object, Group them, and we're going to apply a mask to this group. Here in the Transparency panel, double-click to add a mask, unclip, and the first thing I'm going to do is use the pen tool. I'm going to go View. I'm actually going to shut off my Smart Guides because I don't want them to affect me accidentally clicking an edge. And I'm going to go and create not quite a perfect horizon. So I'm just going to sort of create a little bit of like, I don't know, just some little angular stuff in the horizon. It's going to be sort of subtle, but also sort of noticeable. There we go. And then I can just loop my shape around like this. And if I fill this shape with a solid black, it's going to cut off the bottom of those trees just like so. I can actually select my mask. I can nudge it upward and make the amount of visible trees even less, which is pretty much perfect. Now I'm going to grab a rectangle by using my rectangle tool. I'm going to drag out a rectangle over one of the edges here. And the plan is not just to cut it off harshly and just sharply like that, but rather to fade it. So we're going to add a just simple black to white gradient. Again, remember this is really a dark, dark gray. So select that black color stop, hit the true rich solid black up in the color panel. We'll flip or reverse this gradient and then just begin dragging the black slider in until we get a nice fade here on the edge of this. Now, you can see one thing that's happening is all of a sudden we're getting this little hook joint that's hanging down. Because what's happening is this gradient with a white edge on it, see that white edge on the gradient? It's appearing above the solid black mask that's covering up to create our horizon. So we can just simply select the rectangle, go Object, Arrange, and say, hey, send this thing to the back. Bring that black of my horizon up on top of this, and we correct that issue just like that. Let's select this rectangle and drag a copy over to the other side of the horizon. So hold down Alt or Option, drag a copy right over here, and then just use that Flip Horizontal button in the Properties panel and just add the fade to the other side. And just like that, we get our trees. Now, of course, get out of the mask, select the artwork thumbnail in the Transparency panel. All right, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Now, I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, and I want to create sort of a dome almost above this, sort of like that. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. This is more of an oval, and that's completely fine. I just want to create a dome-looking shape. Now, this looks really messed up and weird. What I want to do, though, interestingly enough, is use my eyedropper tool and sample the gradient we used on the road surface. We don't want to pick up the gradient here in the headlight reflection, but rather the gradient used in the road. So I'm just going to click down there, and you can see we've got this pink to transparent gradient action happening. I'm going to try setting this to the 90-degree angle. You can see it looks pretty good. Now what I'll do is I'm going to push the transparency up, 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 until I'm getting a bit of like shadow almost down there as we approach the horizon. So the atmosphere hangs up in the sky, and as it approaches the surface of the Earth, we get a little reprieve from that color, and it creates this really cool, otherworldly looking effect. Now, because it's all transparent down here, we really don't have to mask it off, but you could duplicate up the mask for the trees and cover this up, and maybe we'll have to because we are going to be blurring this in just a moment. So let's try that and see what happens. Let's select that sky, go Effect, choose Blur, choose Gaussian Blur. We're going to blur this a lot, like 100 pixels, and hit OK. If we deselect, we can see, no, I think that still looks pretty good, but just bear in mind that there is technically shape down there. Okay, let's zoom in on our sky a little bit, and I'm going to add some stars to the sky. Now, the way I'm going to do this is by setting my fill to a very, very light yellow color, and I'm being very specific. I don't want this to be exact white, and mainly because I feel like stars kind of have that, just a slight hint of yellowish color to them, but also it's going to make them easy. It's going to make all these stars easier to select in just a minute. So I'm going to go with something like FFFFEE, hit OK. And then we're going to grab the paintbrush tool. And here we just simply click a few times. So we'll add a few like big stars, maybe something like that. And you can use the left square bracket key and make some smaller stars, right? Clicking the square bracket key a few times makes the brush a little smaller. Click the right square bracket, it makes the brush tool a little larger. And you can just really go in and sort of randomize creating some of these stars. Smaller stars, if they hang out near the horizon, looks a little bit more realistic. The bigger stars should be a little higher up, if you will. But of course, just a good mix of them, kind of at every level, tends to work out pretty nicely. Now that we've created all of these stars, a quick and easy way to select them is by using the magic wand here in Illustrator. So if I click on one of the stars, it's going to select everything with that same fill, but look at this. It's selected the whites of our headlights and some of that shape nonsense down there. Why? Well, if we double click on the magic wand tool, we get the magic wand dialog. And here we can say, look, only select other shapes of the same fill color or opacity. I don't really care about opacity right here, but of the same fill color, but we're giving it a tolerance of 32. Let's knock the tolerance down to like 1. And let's try reselecting these stars. So now I'm going to select the stars, and now you can see it's only selected the stars. The problem before is the stars, yes, they weren't white, but they were so close to the white that we were using in the headlights that it said, it's close enough to the headlight color. Illustrator will pick that up as well, but by reducing the tolerance, we make it more strictly adhere to just the color of those stars in the sky. And now that we have all of those stars, we're going to go Object Group to group them together, and there we have a group of our stars. In fact, I'm going to name this stars because something that I think would be interesting to do would be to give this a little blur. So let's go Effect Gaussian Blur, something very small, like 2 pixels, not 12 pixels, more like 2. There we go. Hit OK. And we'll reduce the opacity here to like 55%. If I deselect, you can see what that looks like. Now, I think to really make this interesting, we should scale this down by holding Shift, scale it down, put it over there, and then drag out a copy of these stars by holding an Alter Option. We duplicate the entire group. Maybe I'll tilt the stars here, make them a little bit bigger, something like that. And we begin to really mix up the stars. And then we could take the stars and really mix things up by making a smaller copy of them and duplicate another small copy there. And I'm just holding down Alter Option and dragging out copies of the stars and making a bunch of copies of these stars and really adding to the depth of the stars in the sky. It really starts to build a much more realistic looking galaxy, if you will. And at this point, we could take some of those foreground stars. I can shift click the little circles here to actually select those layers here in my layers panel. And I can say, you know what, instead of 55% opacity, let's make these like 80. And that'll just bump those up and almost pull them to the foreground a little bit more. Now let me zoom out and you can see what we've got going on. I actually want to select all of this stuff, the trees, the sky, the stars, everything, and nudge it down a little bit closer to my car, something more like that. And I think the last finishing touch would be to add a moon up here in the sky. This will be pretty quick and easy. Let's grab the ellipse tool. I am going to make sure I'm not drawing with a stroke, just a fill. And I'll just drag a little moon into the sky right up here. I'll zoom in a little bit more. And for this, I'll grab my eyedropper tool and just sample like a very dark blue color. Let me back out so I can get the dark of the actual background. And now I'm going to duplicate this shape and paste it in front. You can see up here, here's my moon right here at the top of the layers panel. Edit, copy, and then I'm going to paste it in front twice. So edit, paste in front, and edit, paste in front. Now for the topmost ellipse, I'm going to nudge it up and to the left a few times. So maybe something, I don't know, something kind of like that will probably work. And then hold down Shift and select the ellipse directly behind it. So the two top ellipses are selected, and then come up here to my Properties panel and choose the minus front option. And what we've done is we've just created a little crescent moon, which we can now fill with a nice buttery yellow color, kind of like we did with the stars. So let's go ahead and just grab some big bright yellow, maybe knock some of that saturation out of there, hit OK. And then I'll select the dark blue ellipse in the back right here, and just reduce the opacity to something like, I don't know, 25%, something like that. Let's see what that looks like. Zoom out a little bit. We can see just like that, we throw a little star into the sky. So I can just make my panels all go away and take a closer look at the artwork that we just created, fully vectorized here in Adobe Illustrator. All right, well, there you have it. That's the finished effect. Pretty cool. It was a labor of love, quite a process, but we covered so many different things. If you did get through this tutorial and you completed your very own piece of artwork, maybe customized it with your own object silhouette standing there in the road looking at the car oncoming, make sure you upload it to Instagram and share it with me. Tag me in the image. Actually, press and tag me in the image, not just the bio. The tagged images never go away, so I can always get to it and give you a like, give you a comment, really make sure I see see what gets made. My Instagram handle is @tutvid. I love seeing everything that gets made from these tutorials. It's really, really cool. And for learning a bit about the pen tool and direct selection and snapping to point and gradients and gradients and gradients and all kinds of different blend modes and opacities and color effects and everything we covered in this tutorial, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one. And before you go, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more great tutorials every day. Also, buy my course. It helps us do what we do, and this channel is supported by viewers just like you. You can also just click the thumbnail and watch another video from this channel. See you next time, guys.